Welcome to channel Qtomation. In previous session, we have seen how to clone a repository. So in previously one of the session when we have started with GitHub, we have seen how to clone a repository from GitHub repo to our local system. So if you remember, we had created one repository in GitHub directly. This is a remote repository we had created previously, and then we have cloned that repository in our local system. Today we will see if you have already some local repository in your system. Let's say you have already have some existing local repository and that you want to create a link in GitHub for that local repo. So how to create that connection between local repository and how to push that code into GitHub repository, that we will see in today's session. So how to create the connection between our local repository and corresponding remote repository. So what we will do today, we will create one new local repository in our local system. We will create a remote repository on GitHub. Then we will make the connection between that local repository and remote repository, because GitHub is a remote repository. We can create a remote repository in GitHub account, and whatever local repository you want to connect with that remote repository, somehow we have to tell that local repository that this is my remote repository, where we have to create the connection between those two repositories. So how to add that connection, that we will see in today's session. So first one we have to understand is, let's say I am inside this GitHub. So we have already created our GitHub account. We have already seen how to create a new repository. So what I will do, I will create a new repository in GitHub first. I am clicking on new repository. I have to provide some name to this remote repository. Let's say I am providing some name like my project underscore y. So this is the remote repository project name I am giving. I am keeping it as public only, and then I'm just clicking on create repository. So now we have created a remote repository project. So if you see this, we have already created a remote repository first. If you have already some existing repository in your local system, we can follow this step basically. So I will just showcase after creating this repository in remote repo. Now what I want to do is, I want to create one local repository project, and that local repo I want to connect with this remote repository. So whenever, let's say I'm going to my local system now, I'm going to create some project now. Let's say I have created one project folder, my project Y. Whatever project files I am going to add in this folder, this is basically local in our system. The same local code which I am writing currently in my local system, I will just create some files, and then I want to push those files into remote repository. For that we have to create some connection between these two repositories. So how to create that connection, that we will see today. So in this local project, I'm going to create, let's say, a couple of files. Let's say I have created abc.txt. One more file I am creating, let's say xyz.txt. So I have created two files, abc.txt and xyz.txt. Let's add some content. This is abc file content. Saving this file. I am opening xyz.txt file. This is xyz file content. Just imagine it's like some code in your project files. Then what we have to do? We have to first create local repository now. So I'm just going to open git bash. After opening the git bash, what I will do, I have to first initialize empty git local repository. So it will initialize empty git repository in my system. Then I will add those files into staging area in my local repo, and then I will commit those files. Git commit -m. This is my first commit. Okay, so we have committed these two files in our local repository. But still, we have not made any connection with remote repository yet. Now what I want to do, let's say I have this project which is in my local repository. I want to push this code into remote repo. I want to push these files into remote repository. But for that, first we have to tell our local repository that this is going to be my remote repository URL. This is going to be my remote where we want to push this code. So what are the steps for that? So first step is to view the remotes. First step is we have to check if our local repository is currently connected to any remote repository or not. By using git remote command, we can check that if our local repository is connected or associated with any remote repository along with fetch and push URLs, then we can see by using this command. If no remotes are set, then no output will appear. For example, if I go to git bash, so currently we have just created the files and local repo. But if I put git remote command, currently is it associated with any remote repository? Yes or no? No. So if I push git remote command, it will not show you any output. Similarly, if I push git remote -v command, it will not show you any output because currently it is not associated with any remote repository yet. That's why it is not showing you any output. Then what is the next step now? So by using git remote command, we can check. So git remote will show you whatever remote repository we have done the association of that local repo, and git remote -v will show you the list of remote repository associated with your local repo along with fetch and push URL. But currently there are no remotes are set, that's why no output is there. Now how to add the remote? To add the remote to our local repository, we have to follow some commands. First command is git remote add the name of remote, that is we can give origin or we can give any name actually, and this is the URL of our remote repository. For example, let me show you. Currently we want to associate our local repository to this remote repository. So what is the URL for this remote repository? So this is the URL. If you see, this is the URL of the remote repository which we have created. I want to associate my local repository to this remote repository. So this is the URL. I am just copying this URL. Then I have to go to just git bash. What is the command we have to do is git add. We have to use git add. Then we have to provide the name of that remote. So we can put by default it is origin. So when we clone any repository directly from GitHub, it gives that remote repository URL some default name. By default it is origin, but we can give any name. So I will just show you. First we will just give the name as origin. So git add. So what is the command is for that? So we have to use this command git remote add origin. Origin is basically a short name for the URL. So we cannot use entire URL every time. So what we are doing is we are providing some short name for that remote repository URL. We can provide any name. What it means is whenever I am using name as origin, it is referring to that URL. It is referring to that particular GitHub URL like it's an alias name. Origin is a just conventional Git remote name. So whenever we are adding remote for our local repo, we can give any name. So most of the cases, by default, origin is just conventional Git remote name. When we clone any GitHub repository, by default, remote name is set as origin, and we can change it as well. So it is not mandatory that we should provide only origin as name. We can give any name. So for example, we can also provide like this: git remote add my project underscore URL and then the URL. So whatever this URL is, that will be referred as this name. We can provide origin, or let's say we can provide any other name. It is similar to, we have master branch as default branch whenever we create any local repo. So whenever we create any local repository in our system, by default it takes name as a master branch. Similarly, for remote repository, by default origin is default name, and we can change that name anytime. So first, let's say I want to use this command. So I want to attach the remote to my local repo. So what is the command I have to use? Git remote add origin or any other name and then the URL. So let me just show you. So let's go to our project, git remote add. I am first use just origin, git remote add origin and then URL. I am just pasting this URL here. So what it will do is, whatever remote URL we are providing, it will create alias for that remote repository URL as origin. That is the name of our remote. I am just executing this command. So after executing this command, we have added remote successfully for this local repository. So now if I check git remote command, it will show you the name origin. That means we have created and added the remote for our local repository. So this is URL. This is the GitHub repository or remote repository URL which we have added for our local repo. If I use git remote -v command, then it will show you the URLs which we can use to fetch or push for this local repository project. So git remote and git remote -v. So by using these two commands, we can add remote to our local repo. And as I said earlier, we can add any name, we can give any name. We can also rename the remotes as well. So now I say I want to rename this origin. I don't want origin, I just want to remote this. So what is the command for that? Git remote rename old name and then we have to provide the new name. So if I want to change my remote name from origin to my project X URL, or let's say any other name, I just have to use this command. Use git remote rename current name and new name. So what I will do, I will just use renaming command. Let's say git remote, I want to rename it. So I'm just renaming it, git remote rename. What is the current name of my remote? Origin. I want to rename it to, let's say, my project Y URL. Let's say my project Y URL. I'm just renaming it. So let's say put this command, and if now I check git remote, it will show you the name which we have provided. So we can give any name I want. So currently I will just use it as a origin only, because most of the cases you will see origin everywhere. So what I will do, I will again rename this. So how to rename this? By using git remote rename my project underscore URL to origin again. I'm just renaming it to origin. So now if I check git remote, what it will show you, the name of remote is origin. So this is how we can rename the remote as well. So we have just renamed the remote and we have just made it as a origin one more time. Now removing the remote, we can also remove the remote as well. But before removing, I will show you how to push the code. So before removing, I will just show you how to push the code. Now as soon as we have added the remote, we can now push the code to remote repository. Now we can push that our local code to remote repository. What is the command for that? command is git push whatever is the remote name and then the branch name which we want to create there. So if you provide the main here, it will create the main branch, it will push the code and it will create main branch in remote repo. If you write master here, it will push the code and it will create master branch in remote repo. So whatever name you can give here, you can either give it as a main or you can simply give it as a master also. It totally depends on you. So what I will do, if I see this is my GitHub repository, if I refresh this, currently it is not having our local repository code project yet because we have just created the remote repository, but we have not pushed our code from local repo to this remote repo. So what I have to do is, I will again go back to my local repository project folder. What is the command we have to use? Git push, what is the name of remote? Origin, and what branch name I have to create. So let's say I want to give the name as a master only because now I am pushing the local repository. On local repository currently how many branches are there? So in local repo, before pushing this code, let me check how many branches are there in my local repo. So if I see git branch command, currently we are only having only one branch, that is master branch, which is present on our local system. Only one branch is there. So to avoid the confusion, what I will do, this is our local repository master branch. I just want to push this code to remote repository and I will name it as a master branch only. In remote repo also I want to present it as a master branch. So what command I can use is git push origin master. So what it will do, I am just using this command git push origin master. So it will push the code from our local repository to remote repository. It will push the code from local repo to remote repo. So let it push the code. Yeah. So if you are using very first time, it might ask you for username and password of your GitHub account. You have to provide that, and after that it will push the code to remote repo. So now if I go to my remote repository, if I refresh this page, let's refresh this page. If you see now, all the files of our local repository are present in our now remote repository. If you see abc.txt, which is present in now remote repo as well. Similarly, xyz.txt also file is present on remote repo as well. So this is how we have pushed our local code files to remote repository. And for this remote repository, if you see, what is the branch which is created? Master branch. We have pushed our codes from master branch to master branch. So when we use this command, git push origin and master, so we have renamed it. If you have provided main here, it would have created main branch here. So whatever branch name you want, you can provide here. You can, if you want to create as a master branch, you can give it as a master. If you provide main here, it will create as a main branch here. So this is how we can successfully push the code to remote repository. So this is how we can successfully push the code to remote repo. Now what we can do is, we can also create a different branch as well. We can also push different branches as well. So let's see what I will do. Now I will come back to my local repo. In local repository, how many branches we have? Only one branch is there. Now what I will do, I will create one new branch, let's say feature branch, in my local repository. So how to create a new branch? Let's use git branch command. What is the branch name? Let's say feature x branch. So I have created a new branch, feature x branch. In this feature x branch, I will have to check. Currently I am on master branch. So let's check out to feature x branch by using git checkout command. Git checkout feature x. So what it will do? We will move to now switch. We have switched to feature x branch now. Now in this feature x branch, what I will do? I will create one new file. Let's say touch which is only in feature X branch currently. Touch feature underscore X dot txt file. So we have created one new file feature underscore X dot txt in feature X branch. And along with that, I will modify abc.txt file. Let's say I'm just modifying this abc.txt file, and let's say adding some feature X changes. I have added some new line. Then what I will do? I will add these changes to staging area, and then I will commit those changes. Git commit -m, and these are the changes I am committing which are specific to only feature X branch. It is specific because we are in feature X branch. We have added a new file in feature X branch. We have committed these changes in feature X branch only. These are not committed to master branch yet. We have just made changes in our new branch, that is feature X branch. So currently how many branches do we have? Git branch, it will show you 2 branches, feature X and master branch. Now what I want to do is, currently in remote repo, currently we have only pushed the changes of master branch only. I want to push now feature X branch changes also to remote repository. So for that, what we have to do? We have to first check out to feature X branch. We are already in feature X branch. So once we are check out to, first we have to ensure that on which branch you want to push. So we have to first check out to that feature branch, git checkout branch name. On our local repo, we are already on the feature X branch. And then we can push that branch by using this command, git push. What is the remote name we have added? Origin. Git push origin and the branch name which we want to push. So now what I will do, I will just use git push remote name, that is origin, and what is the branch name we want to push? Feature X branch. So when I execute this command, if you see, I am pushing this new branch changes to remote repository. So what it will do is, it will again create a new branch in my remote repository as well. So if it has successfully pushed those changes to remote repository. So if I go to remote repo now, if I refresh this page, let's refresh this page in remote repository. If you see now, along with master branch, now feature X branch is also present now. So in feature X branch, what are the changes we have added? So I'm just selected the feature X branch. New file which we have added, that is feature underscore X.txt, it is present in feature X branch only. If I open this abc.txt, if you remember, we have added some changes which are only present in feature X changes in feature X branch. If you select the master branch, in master branch, those changes will not be present because we have pushed those changes into feature X branch only. So if you see abc.txt having only the content which is previously present in master branch, also only xyz.txt is present. Feature X branch file is not present here because we are in master branch. So 2 branches are created in remote repository as well. So this is how we can push the changes to different branches as well. We have to first check out to the branch on which we want to make the push. Then we can push the branch by using this syntax, git push remote name. It can be a origin or whatever remote name if you have given, and the branch name, git push origin feature branch. So feature X branch we have pushed to remote repository. So this is how we can use creating a local repository, new project, and pushing it to remote repository. And last one is, we can also remove the remotes as well. So we can also remove the remotes as well. So if I want to disassociate the remote from your local repo, we can use git remote remove command along with name of that remote. So now if I show you, currently if I check git remote command -v, it will show you on which remote repository we are currently associated with. So whatever file changes we are making, whatever file changes we are pushing, those will go to this remote repository. But now I want to disassociate, or let's say I want to remove this connection. Then we have to use command like git remote remove. After that, we have to provide the remote name. So what is the name we have provided? Origin. So if I provide this name and execute this command, it will disassociate our local repo and remote repo. It will remove the connection between local repository and remote repository. So if I check git remote now, it will not show you any output because we have successfully disassociated the connection between our local repo and remote repo. If you again want to make the connection, the same steps you have to follow. What is the steps? Git add remote name, git remote, add origin, that we can add. So this is how we can use different commands by using adding remote. You can add any remote name. For example, you can add git remote add origin. Origin is just a name. It is just a name we are providing it to URL, because every time we cannot write this entire URL in our commands. That's why we are saying that this URL is basically origin. You can give any name. So let's say again, if I want to add some another origin name, I can simply add git remote add whatever name we want to give along with URL.